There comes a moment in the life of every highly sensitive person that marks a point of no return, a clear line between what was and what will be. It's not just when they cry. It's not just when they get hurt. It's not even when they're betrayed for the 10th time. It's when they stop feeling. And that, friend, is the most dangerous thing that can happen in the human emotional universe. Because when a highly sensitive person gives up, they don't just become another ordinary person. They transform into something that Carl Jung described as the awakened shadow. And Andrew Huberman now confirms with cutting-edge neuroscience. Today, you're going to understand why the narcissist should be afraid, why the manipulator should be terrified, why everyone who has ever abused someone's empathy should be losing sleep right now. Because the highly sensitive person who has given up hasn't lost anything. They've simply stopped giving what you never deserved. Before we continue, I need you to understand something fundamental about the biology of the highly sensitive person. In 2024, researchers at Frontiers in Psychology published a groundbreaking study on what they call sensory processing sensitivity. And what they discovered changes everything we thought we knew about highly sensitive people. The brain of a highly sensitive person isn't just more emotional, it's literally more connected. The areas responsible for empathy, for emotional processing, and for social awareness are denser, more active, and more integrated than in people with typical sensitivity. This means that when a highly sensitive person feels pain, they don't just feel their own pain. They feel the pain of everyone around them. When someone in the room is suffering, even in silence, the highly sensitive person absorbs it like an emotional sponge. And for years, for decades, they carried this weight, thinking it was their obligation, thinking that feeling was their purpose, thinking that their capacity to love unconditionally was a gift to the world, until the world proved that it didn't deserve that gift. Carl Jung had a concept that he called individuation. It's the process by which a person becomes truly themselves, integrating all parts of their psyche, including the parts they've hidden out of fear. For most people, individuation happens gradually over a lifetime. For the highly sensitive person who has given up, it happens in a moment of rupture, and when it happens, something extraordinary emerges. Jung called this the integration of the shadow. The shadow, for Jung, is everything that we repress, hide, deny about ourselves. In the case of the highly sensitive person, the shadow contains something very specific and very powerful, the ability to not care. You need to understand what this means. Throughout their life, the highly sensitive person was conditioned to believe that their sensitivity was both their greatest virtue and their greatest weakness. They were taught that feeling too much was a problem to be fixed, and that their excessive empathy was something to be controlled. And somewhere deep in their psyche, they repressed the other possibility, the possibility of simply shutting it off. When the highly sensitive person finally accesses this shadow, when they finally integrate this repressed part of themselves, they don't become insensitive. In the common sense of the word, they become selective. And that is the most dangerous transformation in the world. Researchers in 2025 began to study a phenomenon that they call the cold empath. These are people who maintain their full capacity to perceive emotions, to read intentions, to understand hidden motivations, but who consciously choose not to respond emotionally. They see everything and understand everything and feel only when they decide to feel. This is the exact opposite of the narcissist. The narcissist is someone who genuinely can't perceive the emotions of others. They need to manipulate, because they have no other way to get what they want. They depend on narcissistic supply, because without it, they collapse. The highly sensitive person who has given up doesn't need any of that. They already know exactly what you're feeling. They've already perceived your insecurities, your weaknesses, your deepest fears. They've spent years absorbing this information, processing it, trying to help. The difference now is that they simply don't care anymore to help you. Andrew Huberman, a professor of neurobiology at Stanford, has made a fascinating discovery about what happens in the brain when someone develops what he calls extreme emotional resilience. In episode 49 of his podcast, he explains that there's a structure in the brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, or AMCC. This structure is responsible for something that Huberman describes as the will to live. And here's what's extraordinary. The AMCC grows when we face difficult challenges. It strengthens when we do things that we don't want to do. It develops when we resist pain and continue anyway. Huberman mentions that the AMCC is smaller in obese people and larger in athletes. It grows when we diet. It expands when we discipline ourselves. But there's something that he didn't mention explicitly, but that subsequent research has revealed. The AMCC also grows dramatically in people who have experienced repeated emotional trauma and have consciously chosen to stop being affected by it. The highly sensitive person who has given up hasn't just developed this structure, they've hypertrophied it. Years of pain, years of betrayal, years of giving everything and receiving nothing in return have created in them a neurological fortress that most people will never experience. And now, when they look at you, they look from inside that fortress, protected, unshakable, completely free. You need to understand what it means when someone who felt everything decides to feel nothing for you specifically. It's not indifference or in the common sense. It's something much more precise and much more devastating. The highly sensitive person who has given up still feels deeply. They still get emotional with music, with art, with the beauty of the world. They still cry in movies, still connect with animals, still feel compassion for strangers who are genuinely suffering. But they've developed something that modern psychology is starting to call selective empathy. They consciously choose who deserves their emotional depth. And if you're reading this with a certain discomfort, if something inside of you is contracting, maybe it's because you know that you're no longer on that list. Carl Jung wrote extensively about what happens when a person's shadow finally emerges. He warned that the shadow, repressed for too long, gains power. The more you deny a part of yourself, the more energy it accumulates in the unconscious. For the highly sensitive person, HSP, the awakened shadow was the ability to set absolute boundaries. It was the ability to say no without guilt. It was the ability to watch someone suffer the consequences of their own actions and not rush in to save them. As when this shadow finally emerges, it emerges with the full force of years of repression, and the result is someone who combines two things that normally don't exist together: absolute emotional perception with complete emotional detachment. This is what makes the checked-out, highly sensitive person so dangerous to anyone who tried to manipulate them. The narcissist depends on one fundamental thing for their manipulations to work: the emotional reactivity of the target. They provoke and expect a reaction. They triangulate and expect jealousy. They devalue and expect despair. But what happens when the target simply stops reacting? Not because they're faking it, not because they're using some grey rock technique they learned online, but because they genuinely, neurologically, emotionally, don't care anymore. The narcissist panics because their entire strategy depends on extracting emotional energy from other people. And when the checked-out, highly sensitive person looks at them with that absolute calm, that unshakable peace, that void where there was once so much love, the narcissist realizes they've lost their most valuable supply, and they're not getting it back, ever. There's a phenomenon that researchers in 2024 have started calling the cold transformation. It's what happens when someone, who has spent their entire life being the warmest person in the room, unconsciously decides to lower their emotional temperature. It's not depression. Andrew Huberman explains that depression involves anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. It involves alterations in the dopamine and norepinephrine systems that result in a lack of energy and motivation. The cold transformation is completely different. The person continues feeling pleasure, continues having energy, continues being motivated. They've simply redirected all that energy away from the people who were draining them. And here's what scares the manipulators so much. The cold transformation is permanent. Once the highly sensitive person integrates their shadow, once they experience the peace of not carrying everyone else's emotional weight, they don't want to go back. They've discovered a way to exist that's 1,000 times more sustainable than before, and they're not giving that up for anyone. Carl Jung had another relevant concept here. He talked about what he called the transcendent function, the ability of the psyche to create something new from the tension between opposites. For the highly sensitive person, the opposites were feeling too much and feeling nothing at all. For years, they oscillated between these extremes. 1 minute, they were the emotional sponge who absorbed everything. The next, they were trying to be cold and failing miserably because denying their sensitive nature was like trying to stop breathing. The transcendent function created a third way, feeling deeply, but consciously choosing where to invest that depth. This isn't coldness, it's emotional wisdom. And that's exactly what the narcissist can't understand, because for them, emotions are tools of manipulation. They can't conceive that someone can genuinely choose where to love, because they themselves have never genuinely loved anyone. When they encounter the checked-out, highly sensitive person, they encounter something that doesn't exist in their mental map. Someone who sees them completely. Someone who understands exactly what they're trying to do, and someone who simply doesn't care. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine spending your entire life being able to feel what others feel. Imagine absorbing the anger, the sadness, the anxiety, the fear of every person around you. Imagine trying to heal wounds that aren't yours, and carrying weights that don't belong to you, giving love to people who only know how to take. Now imagine that one day, you wake up and realize you don't have to do that anymore, not because you've become insensitive, but because you've finally understood that your sensitivity is a gift, too precious to be given to just anyone. That's the journey of the checked-out, highly sensitive person, and the destination of that journey isn't bitterness, it isn't cynicism, it isn't closing your heart forever. The destination is the freedom to choose. Andrew Huberman talks about how the brain forms new neural patterns through conscious repetition. When you practice something consistently, you literally rebuild the connections in your brain. The checked-out, highly sensitive person practiced something new, practiced saying no without guilt, practiced observing without absorbing, practiced being present without getting lost in the experience of another, and after months, sometimes years, of these new practices, their brain adapted. They still have all the neurological wiring of high sensitivity. The areas of empathy are still dense and active. The capacity to perceive is still intact. But now, there's a new structure of control, a conscious choice, a gate that they open and close when they decide. This is neuroplasticity applied to emotional survival, and that's why the transformation is irreversible. Once you build that gate, once you experience the power of deciding who enters your emotional world, you're never going to let just anyone in again, just because they knocked on the door. The narcissist who once had unrestricted access to the highly sensitive person's heart now encounters a wall, not a wall of anger, not a wall of hurt, a wall of absolute peace, and that's infinitely more terrifying. Let's talk about something that few have the courage to admit. The checked-out, highly sensitive person hasn't just protected themselves. They've become dangerous. Not dangerous in the sense that they're going to hurt someone. Not dangerous in the sense that they're going to seek revenge or retaliate. Dangerous in the sense that they now possess a power that few human beings develop. They see through the masks instantly. Years of high sensitivity have trained their nervous system to detect incongruencies. They notice when the smile doesn't reach the eyes. They notice when the words say one thing, but the body says another. They feel when someone is planning something before the person is even aware of their own plan. And now, instead of using that perception to help the person, they simply use it to protect themselves. They're not going to confront you about your lies. They're simply going to disappear without explanation, without drama, without that emotional closure you were hoping for, that last chance to manipulate, that final argument where you could turn things around. Nothing, just silence. And that silence is far more disturbing than any confrontation could be. There's a defining moment in the life of every highly sensitive person, or HSP, a distinct before and after. This isn't just about sadness or pain, it's a profound shift in their emotional core. The awakened shadow. The tone becomes reflective, almost ominous, emphasizing the sheer gravity of this transformation. We need to convey a sense of awe and trepidation, like a psychological thriller unfolding, hinting at the power and potential danger of this awakening. Think of it as a classic narrative of awakening, of self-discovery, shadows, mirrors, fortresses. These are the images that come to mind. And remember, the focus must always remain on the psychological insights offered by Carl Jung and the neuroscientific perspective provided by Andrew Huberman. Jung wrote that the greatest power a person can develop is the ability to not react. He called this psychic containment, the ability to hold energy, instead of releasing it impulsively. To master the awakened shadow, the highly sensitive person, by nature, has difficulty with this. They feel everything so intensely that they need to express, process. Holding emotions in is physically painful for them. It goes against their very nature. But the highly sensitive person who gave up learned something that changed everything. They learned that they don't need to process with the person who caused the pain. They can process alone, with therapists, with true friends, with their own journal, with nature. They don't need the closure that the abuser will never give. They don't need the validation that will never come. They can simply move on. And this discovery unleashed an absurd amount of power within them. The power of individuation. Because all that energy, that was once wasted trying to make the other person understand, trying to explain their feelings, trying to be heard by someone who had no intention of listening, is now available for other things. For creation, for growth, for relationships that really matter. And the person who hurt them is left on the outside, banging on a door that no longer exists. Andrew Huberman explains that the brain's energy economy is very real. When you stop spending neural resources on unproductive worries, that resource becomes available for other functions. It allows us to master the awakened shadow. The highly sensitive person who gave up experienced this firsthand. All that energy they spent worrying about what others thought, trying to anticipate the needs of others, trying not to disappoint anyone, is suddenly free. And what they do with that energy is impressive. They flourish creatively, professionally, spiritually. They begin to expand in ways that were never possible when they were constantly drained by people who didn't appreciate their worth. And the people who used to suck their energy, they notice the change. They see them thriving, and they don't understand how. After all, they always knew they were too sensitive, too fragile, too dependent. They should have fallen apart without them, right? But they didn't fall apart. They flew. There's a pattern that researchers in 2025 identified in people who underwent significant personality transformations after emotional traumas. They call it the inverted phoenix effect. In the mythology of the phoenix, the bird dies and is reborn from the ashes, basically the same creature, just renewed. But the inverted phoenix effect is different. The person isn't reborn as the same creature. They're reborn as something fundamentally different, something that retains the best parts of what it was before, but that has developed completely new capabilities. The highly sensitive person who gave up retains their depth, their perception, their capacity for genuine connection, selective empathy. But they add something they never had before: fierce discernment, the ability to look at someone and know, in seconds, whether that person deserves access to their inner world, and the willingness to deny that access without a pinch of guilt. This terrifies the manipulator, because they depend on one thing: the victim's tendency to give second chances, to see the best in people, to believe in promises of change. The highly sensitive person who gave up no longer gives second chances to patterns. They might forgive a mistake, but when they recognize a pattern, the pattern they've seen so many times before, they simply walk away. There's no discussion, no argument, no negotiation, just silent recognition and strategic withdrawal, mastering the awakened shadow, and the manipulator is left there, with all their tried and tested techniques, completely impotent. Jung had a fascinating observation about what happens when we integrate our shadow. He said that we gain access to a form of intuition that wasn't available before. The shadow, even repressed, has always been watching, always been collecting data, always been forming judgments that the conscious persona refused to accept. When we finally integrate the shadow, we have access to all that data. The highly sensitive person who gave up suddenly realizes that they always knew who the toxic people in their life were. They always saw the signs. They always felt the danger. But their excessively empathetic persona refused to accept those judgments. It seemed cruel. It seemed anti-empathetic. It seemed against their nature. Now, they no longer have that filter. They see the truth, and they accept the truth, and they act according to it. This is what psychologists are starting to call mature empathy, the ability to deeply understand the emotions and motivations of others, without feeling obligated to do something about it. You can see that someone is suffering. You can understand why they're suffering. And you can consciously choose not to intervene, because you know that your intervention won't help, or because you know that that person needs to learn their own lessons. This isn't cruelty, it's wisdom. And it's exactly what the highly sensitive person who gave up has developed. Let's talk about something important now. The genuine narcissist will read all of this and think I'm describing them. They'll think that they are the highly sensitive person who gave up. After all, they also don't care about the feelings of others. Right? Wrong. The difference is fundamental and unmistakable. The narcissist never cared. They never had the capacity to feel deeply in the first place. Their indifference is an original void, not a conscious choice. The highly sensitive person who gave up chose. They had every capacity to feel, demonstrated that capacity for years or decades, and then strategically decided where to direct that capacity. Selective empathy. The energy is completely different. The narcissist exhales desperation under the mask of indifference. They need validation, attention. Narcissistic supply. Take that away from them, and they collapse. The highly sensitive person who gave up exhales genuine peace. They don't need anything from you. Take what you want. They remain complete. And that completeness, that genuine emotional self-sufficiency, is something that the narcissist can't even comprehend, let alone imitate. Huberman talks about the concept of autonomous emotional regulation. It's the ability to maintain stable emotional states, independently of what's happening externally, mastering the awakened shadow. He explains that this involves various brain structures working in harmony. The prefrontal cortex regulating the amygdala, the parasympathetic nervous system balancing the sympathetic, the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, or AMCC, monitoring and adjusting in real time. Highly sensitive people traditionally have difficulty with this because their amygdala is more reactive. They go on high alert more easily. They feel things more intensely, and it takes them longer to return to equilibrium. But the highly sensitive person who walked away did something extraordinary. They used their own sensitivity to train their self-regulation. Because they felt the consequences of being unregulated so intensely, because the pain of dysregulation was so acute for them, they developed a powerful motivation to master this skill. And master it, they did. The highly sensitive person who walked away often has better emotional regulation than people who were never sensitive in the first place. Because they fought for it. Because they practiced constantly. Because for them, it was literally a matter of survival. And now, when you try to dysregulate them, when you try to provoke a reaction, when you use all the techniques that worked so well before, you encounter a fortress, not a fortress of coldness, a fortress of peace. There's a moment that every manipulator fears. It's the moment when they realize they've lost their power. Not that the victim is pretending not to care, not that the victim is using the grey rock technique while internally in turmoil. Not that the victim will eventually come back as they always have. It's the moment when they look into the eyes of the person they used to control and see nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not a hidden hope of reconciliation, just peace. And in that moment, something changes in the manipulator too, because for the first time, they're looking at someone who genuinely doesn't need them, someone who genuinely wants nothing from them, someone who is completely whole without them. And this reflects back something that they've spent their entire life avoiding facing, their own emptiness, their own desperate dependence on narcissistic supply, their own inability to exist without someone to manipulate. The highly sensitive person who walked away has become a mirror that the narcissist can't avoid. And what they see in that mirror terrifies them. Carl Jung wrote that when we encounter our shadow in another, we usually react with projection. We project our unwanted qualities onto other people because we can't accept them in ourselves. The narcissist projects constantly. They accuse others of exactly what they do. They call the manipulator the one they manipulate. They call the selfish person the one they exploit. But the highly sensitive person who walked away no longer accepts these projections. They recognize what's happening and simply return the projection to the sender, not with words, not with arguments, not with elaborate defenses, just with silent and unwavering presence. The projection no longer sticks. It comes back like a boomerang, and the narcissist is forced to face what they projected. This is what happens when you try to manipulate someone who has completely integrated their shadow. You lose all your tools, because all the tools of manipulation depend on unintegrated shadows. They depend on unconscious fears, on repressed guilts, on unhealed wounds. The highly sensitive person who walked away has already faced their fears, already processed their guilt, already healed their wounds. They no longer have hooks where you can hang your manipulations, and that makes them, for all practical purposes, immune to you. I want to speak directly to you now. If you're the highly sensitive person who is in the process of walking away, or if you've already gone through this transformation, I need you to understand something crucial. You haven't become a bad person. You haven't betrayed your nature. You haven't lost your light. What you've done is learn to protect that light from the people who only wanted to extinguish it. Jung said that becoming who you truly are requires you to integrate all parts of yourself. Not just the beautiful parts, not just the socially acceptable parts, not just the parts that make everyone like you. The ability to walk away, the ability to say no, the ability to allow others to suffer the consequences of their own choices. These are also parts of you, and integrating them doesn't make you less empathetic. It makes you more whole. Andrew Huberman talks about how the human nervous system was designed for protection. The same structures that allow us to feel deep connection were also designed to pull us away from danger. For too long, highly sensitive people have been taught to ignore their protective instincts. They were taught that feeling discomfort with someone was a flaw of theirs, not a valid signal. They were taught to give infinite chances, while their own needs were completely ignored. The highly sensitive person who walked away has finally honored that protective part of themselves. And that's health, not pathology. There's a question that I'm asked frequently. Can the highly sensitive person who walked away love again? The answer is yes. Absolutely yes. In fact, they can love more deeply and more healthily than ever before, because now they consciously choose who receives their love. They don't pour their emotional depth into any container that appears. They seek out worthy containers. And when they find one, when they find someone who genuinely deserves their depth, the love they offer is something extraordinary. It's a love without dependence. It's a love without fear of abandonment. It's a love offered freely, not demanded or manipulated. It's the purest love that exists, because it comes from someone who knows that they'll be okay, with or without it. The narcissist will never understand this. For them, love is a transaction. Love is control. Love is ensuring that the other person needs you so much that they'll never leave. But the love of the highly sensitive person who walked away is the opposite. It's saying, I choose you freely, but every day. Not because I need you, but because your presence genuinely enriches my life. And if one day that changes, I'll leave with the same peace with which I stayed. That freedom terrifies the manipulator, because they can't hold someone who isn't afraid to leave. I want to leave you with one last reflection. Carl Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. For years, the highly sensitive person was directed by unconscious patterns, by the need to please, by the fear of rejection, by the belief that their worth depended on how much they gave to others. These patterns repeatedly led them into the arms of people who only knew how to take. When they finally walked away, they made those patterns conscious. They saw clearly what they were doing and chose to do differently. That's the true individuation that Jung spoke of. Not becoming perfect, but becoming conscious, and using that consciousness to choose a life aligned with who you really are. The highly sensitive person who walked away didn't give up on themselves. He gave up trying to be who other people wanted him to be. He stopped shrinking himself to fit into relationships that couldn't contain him. He relinquished his power to people who never deserved a single piece of it. And by letting go of all of that, he finally found himself. If you resonated with this video, if you felt every word as if it were written about you, then I need you to do something. Leave a like, not for me, but as a recognition for yourself, that you understood something important today, that you're on the right path, that the transformation happening within you, or that has already happened, isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to honor. Comment below with one word, any word that captures how you're feeling right now, because others who have been through the same journey will see your comment, and they'll know they aren't alone. And subscribe if you aren't already, because videos like this will continue to be made for people like you, people who feel deeply, as Carl Jung would say, tapping into the collective unconscious, people who love with intensity, people who have finally learned that this intensity is a gift that should only be given to those who deserve it. Much like Andrew Huberman explains the neurochemistry of trust and vulnerability, the narcissist didn't expect this. They didn't expect you to heal. They didn't expect you to find your strength. They didn't expect that one day they'd look into your eyes and find Not a victim, but a survivor. Not someone broken, but someone whole. Not someone needing approval, but someone completely free. And now that you've become this, the last thing you should do is look back, because ahead of you lies an entire life waiting. A life where you choose who enters. A life where your sensitivity is honored, not exploited. A life where loving doesn't mean losing yourself. Go live that life. You more than deserve it.